Hey crafters! Well, you can tell. It's spring. Oh my gosh, look at just look. Isn't that amazing? Oh my gosh, look at the green. Oh my God, we've got baby leaves coming out. We even have some trees blooming and oh my word. Ugh. I'm very inspired by spring right now. I'm loving the colors. I'm loving the green and just the sun, and it's such a treat. Especially after, all the tough stuff we got going on in the world right now. Thank goodness for spring. Praise be. Goodness gracious. It's time for a little spring sewing. I'm definitely thinking ahead towards warmer weather and, some brighter colors and florals and some of that mood-lifting fun stuff. So I am picturing a spring-inspired kind of prairie / peasant styled maxi dress. And I found some great springy fabric, and I'm going to use a pattern that I know and love, and I think it's going to be a lot of fun and hopefully super wearable as well. Let me show you the fabric I've got, and let me show you the pattern, and we'll get started. See you in a minute. Well, here's our fabric. Here's our pattern. I have definitely used this one before. You might recognize it from my cottagecore dress, or is it a nightgown project, where I basically made this dress, but I made it longer, so it's kind of like a maxi length. This one's kind of fun because it just has an elastic neck, elastic around the sleeves, kind of dolman sleeves, and then you could make this one, which is like just one piece to the dress, but with an elastic waist added, or you could do this one, which, let's flip over just a little bit. This one has a separate piece for the bodice and then the tiers of fabric for the skirt. I've made both. I like both. This pattern is pretty straightforward, although, it does still take time. But I think what I want to do is a variation of this one. I think I like the separate bodice piece and then the skirt gathered into that. I think that will be nice. But instead of doing the tiers, I think I want to make it more of just an A-line, maybe just, two pieces for the skirt, a front and a back. I might add a ruffle though, maybe at the bottom, but I don't think I want the 3 layers of ruffles. So kind of simplify this one a little bit is what I'm envisioning. This one, but a little less ruffly. I don't know. Hey, well, back to our fabric. I got both of these as remnants, so I have about 3 yards of this one in one piece, and then I have 2 smaller pieces that are kind of maybe about 1 yard each, but with really uneven edges. So we'll see. I'm hoping to make the bulk of the dress this, and then I do have some of this almost matching, sort of, mostly blue dot fabric, which could be super cute as maybe a ruffle on the bottom of the skirt, or maybe a matching sash. If I have to, I could even make the sleeves out of this. We'll see how it goes. These easy projects always take some time, so I'm probably going to work on this just, over the course of time, however long it takes. I'll start by ironing my fabric, get our pieces cut out, and then we'll dive in. Here we go. All right, well, we got all those pieces cut out. You can see over here we've got our front and back bodice piece, and then we've got the 2 sleeves over here. There are 2 of them. They're just right sides together over there. Now I do have 2 skirt pieces. These guys are actually folded in half, and they are stacked on top of each other as well. I kind of had to estimate a little bit on this skirt, because remember, this dress design would normally have a skirt made of 3 tiers of ruffled fabric, and I just wanted one main kind of A-line skirt. So here's how I estimated that. Let's get our pattern on here. This pattern piece is designed to be the top ruffle of the skirt, so I kind of just used that as my starting point. It would, be on the fold. And I just used that as kind of my starting width. And then I just kind of, using a ruler, flared out a bit to the full width of my fabric. Now, my fabric's not all that wide, so it couldn't flare all that much, but I'm hoping that'll work. And then, of course, later I can always add a ruffle at the bottom of that blue contrast fabric if I want. I haven't cut that out yet because I'm just not quite sure what length I'll need for that. So let's move on to the next step. Okay, so looking at our next steps here, I think we're on this one because we're going to sew the front and back bodices together with the side seams. Now, we don't sew them together at the shoulder seams. There is no shoulder seam yet. That's actually going to be made by the sleeve because it's kind of a dolman sleeve. So sewing on the sleeves also creates shoulders, which is super cool. And then we need to sew up the sleeves. I've made a note to myself to make sure you're sewing one sleeve of each orientation. So that you have, if your fabric is not like one-sided, it can be hard to make sure that you sew a sleeve that goes in each direction. So that's my note to myself, because guess who's made that mistake before? And then they also want you to add the sleeve elastic. I'm going to add that last, but before I sew my sleeve together, I'm probably going to do a little ironing to make that casing first, just because it's easier to do when this is kind of flat. So side seams, and then sew up the sleeves. And yeah, then they want you to sew the sleeves to the garment. That's cool. Okay, well, we'll save the rest for later, but not too many steps. Let's start with this one and that one. Hey, well, with those sleeves on, we finally got what looks like the top of a dress. Okay, now I do need to finish both the edges of the sleeves and I need to finish the neckline. Our pattern direction gives you a couple different ideas. They suggest, this is the neckline of the dress, they suggest rolling under the fabric to make a little tube, which then you would insert elastic. And you do something pretty similar for the edges of the sleeves. So that's what they're suggesting. I think I might mix things up a little bit and just put some single fold bias tape along the top of the neckline, and then I could actually use the bias tape to make a tube for the elastic instead of using the fabric itself. I don't know. I have some almost perfectly matching bias tape, so I might end up doing that. I gotta say though, the bias tape does get a little bulky. Some people might think it's a little bit scratchy. I don't know. See what you think and which one you want to do. I like the bias tape option because it involves less meticulous ironing. Yes. So we got to do some bias tape around the neckline, and then we can move on to the next step. Hey, well, we've got the skirt coming together. You might notice, though, I have added some pockets. Now, this pattern does not include a pocket pattern, so I had to kind of borrow one from another dress that did. And here's what I've done so far. So I cut out pocket pieces. I need 2 pieces for each pocket, and then I stitched pocket piece to each side of the skirt. And I did that on both sides of the skirt, of course, so that I've got 2 pockets. Okay, so next I need to do basically this part. I have got the pockets and the skirt front and back all pinned together. Now I need to sew a little bit around each pocket, and then I need to sew the side seams of the skirt. And so that's where I'm at. Got the pinning done. Now I need to do the sewing. And then after that, I will also need to do some really long gathering stitches at the top of my skirt, because I made this skirt really big. I want to be able to gather that fabric in, scrunch it in, so that it could then be sewn to the bodice. So first of all, gotta sew the pockets in and sew those side seams, and then I'll add some gathering stitches at the top so that we can get closer to attaching this to the top of the dress. Yay! Hey guys, well, I've been working, as you saw, to gather the skirt. I added those really big stitches, and I tugged on the bottom thread. I did 2 rows of stitches, and then you tug on that bottom thread and you gather up your fabric. So this outside is my skirt, and then look, I am pinning in the top of the dress. This down here, this tucked down piece here, this is actually the shirt. So yeah, the top of the dress is down in there. So I'm trying to pin the skirt to that top of the dress, and I've gathered the skirt to meet the dress top. Now, you might be wondering, why on earth didn't I just match up the raw edges? Why do I have so much extra skirt fabric peeking out from the top? Normally you'd just pin the raw edges together, sew them up, and good to go. Well, I'm working on kind of a sneaky idea here. I'm wondering if, after I sew, my seam to get the top of the dress attached to the skirt, if I have a little extra fabric, maybe I can kind of roll that and stitch it down, making a big tube around the waist of the dress. I could maybe cover up the raw edges left from sewing the top and the skirt together. Maybe I could cover those, and if I have a tube, maybe I could insert a little elastic going around the waist. You know what? I think this might work. I had plenty of skirt fabric. It was actually too long, so I thought maybe I could use about 1.5 inches extra skirt fabric and just pull it up a little taller and save that out, and then see if I can make a casing for the elastic out of it. I haven't seen people do exactly this before. I have seen people take just, like standard seam allowance, like, maybe 5/8 of an inch, and use that to make a tiny channel for elastic. But, I don't know. I want to see if this works. So I got to finish pinning on the skirt and the top, and then, yeah, gotta stitch those guys together, and I'll leave this extra just to see if I can use it a little later. Good morning, everybody. Well, it's the next day, and I did get some work done on this last night. You can tell it's looking more like a dress. Hey. So definitely have the elastic in the neckline. I got that with that single fold bias tape, made the tube out of that. If you haven't worked with single fold bias tape, just look up a video on how to use that stuff. It's kind of cool. And then you can tell I did make some little tubes at the bottom of the sleeve. So I just kind of rolled the raw edges over a couple times so that I had all the raw edges hidden, and I now have like a little tube in here. I left a little gap in the sewing on one side so that I can, oh, there's the little gap. It's kind of hard to see, but I can put some elastic in there. I used that long silver bodkin to put elastic into the neckline. You could also use a safety pin. Just attach that to the end of your elastic and then push it on through. I'll have to try the dress on to see how much scrunch I want in those sleeves before finalizing that and cutting off the elastic and stitching that down. Now let's take a look at this. This waistband here. You guys remember me saying, hey, maybe I could leave some extra seam allowance when I sew the skirt to the top, and maybe I could use that extra fabric to make a tube for the elastic. Well, it didn't quite work, because you know how there's a lot of fabric here in the skirt because it's gathered into the top of the dress. It's all ruffly. Well, there was a lot of extra skirt fabric, but it was all ruffly, very full, because there's a lot of it. So making a tube out of that was just really bulky, and it didn't work. So sorry, I had to try the experiment. I'm learning as I go. Sometimes you just gotta try it, right? Yeah, well, that didn't work. So instead, I'm going to be using some of this wide single fold bias tape to make a tube for the elastic. And let me turn the dress over and I'll show you how I've sewn that on and how I'll continue sewing it to make that tube. Okay, let's get a little closer look. Okay, so you can see kind of under this bias tape, here is my seam where I gathered the skirt to the top and stitched them together. So I used to have a whole lot of extra fabric here. I've trimmed that down so it's nice and short. And then, pretty similar to what I did along the neck, I opened up my bias tape and I pinned it to that seam and just stitched in the ditch. That's what they call it, stitch in the ditch with that bias tape. So now I have my seam, I have some bias tape attached to it, and then it's pretty easy to just roll the rest of the bias tape over and pin it to the top of the dress, going all the way around. And now once I've got the rest of the pins in here, I'll sew along the top pretty close to the edge, and it'll allow me a little tube right in here. I could use a little wider elastic. I was using a 1/4 inch for here. I might use a little wider for the waistband just to make it a little more comfortable. But I'll put elastic into this little tube, you know, leave a gap in the stitching, insert the elastic with my bodkin or my safety pin, and then sew that elastic closed once I like the way it looks, and it should gather in the waist kind of like that. Now, of course, I always get ahead of myself, and these things always take longer than I think they're going to. So I was going to put a ruffle on the skirt using that blue fabric. Where's my blue fabric? I don't know. My blue fabric is somewhere. I was going to make a ruffle. I don't think I want a ruffle. I think I might just make a sash. We'll see. I still have to hem this dress. So there's a bit more to be done. And it always takes more than I think it's going to. But I think I'm going to, you know, finish this waistband, get some elastic in there, get some elastic in the sleeves, get to hemming, and then, you know, I'll look at the belt situation. And I'll show you how that goes.